I never thought I'd stumble upon the kind of truth that could shatter me in an instant. But one evening, when I accidentally opened my family's private group chat, I saw a message that froze my blood. Finally rid of her. They weren't talking about a stranger or some outside enemy. They were talking about me. That single screenshot changed everything. Not just in how I saw my family, but in how the world would soon come to see them too. What began as heartbreak would unravel into a story of secrets, betrayal, and a hidden truth they never expected me to uncover. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Claire Donovan, and for most of my life, I thought of myself as an ordinary woman just trying to hold together the pieces of a complicated family. I grew up in a small town in Oregon, surrounded by towering pines and winding back roads where everyone knew everyone's name. My parents, Robert and Susan, had been pillars of the community in their own way. My father owned a hardware store on Main Street, and my mother worked part-time as a nurse at the local clinic. From the outside, we looked like a perfectly functional family. But anyone who grew up inside those walls knew that appearances were everything to the Donovans, and truth was often buried under layers of politeness, denial, and whispered lies. I was the middle child, sandwiched between my older brother, Ethan, and my younger sister, Lily. Ethan was the golden boy, varsity quarterback, straight-A student, and later a lawyer with a corner office downtown. Lily was the darling of the family, delicate and artistic, with a knack for drawing and a way of charming anyone she met. And then there was me. I was never the star, never the favorite. I worked hard in school, but rarely stood out. I was kind, thoughtful, maybe a bit shy, but in a family like mine, that translated into being forgettable. As we grew older, the differences only deepened. Ethan became the one my father bragged about to every customer who walked into his store. Lily became my mother's project, the fragile bird she nurtured and praised. And me? I became the one who was always expected to help, to keep the peace, to clean up the messes no one else wanted to handle. I told myself that was love in its own way, that being relied on meant I mattered. But deep down, I always suspected that if I weren't there, no one would notice. That suspicion became reality the night I stumbled across their group chat. It was a Sunday evening, and I had just finished preparing lesson plans for the week. I worked as an elementary school teacher, a job that didn't make headlines, but gave me purpose. I loved my students and the small joys of their curiosity. But that evening, I was exhausted. I curled up on the couch, scrolled through my phone, and accidentally tapped the wrong app. A notification had popped up earlier from Family Matters, a group chat I didn't even realize I'd been added to. I assumed it was just the usual back and forth about holiday plans or Lily's art show, but when the chat opened, my eyes fell instantly on the words I wasn't meant to see. Ethan had typed them. Finally rid of her. And below that, Lily had responded with a string of clapping emojis. My mother had chimed in too. This will be better for everyone. She's been holding us back for too long. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe they were talking about a tenant who moved out of one of Ethan's rental properties or some toxic friend of Lily's. I scrolled upward, hoping for context. What I found instead made my stomach lurch. They weren't vague. They weren't talking about anyone. Message after message spelled it out clearly. My family had been talking about me behind my back, about how I didn't fit in, about how they wished I'd move away, maybe even cut ties altogether. I can't believe she still thinks she's one of us, Lily had written just 2 days earlier. She's too soft, too weak. She'll never amount to anything, Ethan had added. She needs to stop clinging to us. She's old enough to build her own life. Honestly, the sooner she's gone, the better. I remember staring at the screen, my heart pounding so loudly, I thought I might faint. It felt surreal, like the words were floating in a dream I couldn't wake from. This was my family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, who I had bent over backwards to please, who I had defended when others criticized them. And here they were, celebrating the idea of being rid of me. For several minutes, I just sat frozen, phone clutched in my hand, eyes burning with unshed tears. My first instinct was to deny it, to come up with some rational explanation. Maybe it was all a joke, a horribly cruel joke. Maybe they didn't realize how their words sounded. But the more I read, the more undeniable it became. They meant every word. The betrayal cut so deep it felt physical. I could hardly breathe. And yet, something in me, some instinct I didn't even know I had, made me take a screenshot. Maybe it was self-preservation, maybe it was the desperate need for proof. Because even in that moment, I knew that if I confronted them, they'd find a way to twist it, to gaslight me, to tell me I had misunderstood. That was the Donovan way. Deny, deflect, dismiss. But a screenshot was evidence, hard and undeniable. What I didn't realize then was that this screenshot, this frozen capture of their cruelty, would become the key to unraveling far more than just my family's secret disdain. It would set in motion a chain of events that exposed the rot beneath our carefully polished image. It would attract attention from people I never expected to get involved. And it would ultimately change not just my life, but theirs too, in ways they could never imagine. That night, I sat in silence, staring at the glowing screen until it dimmed in my hand. I thought I had hit rock bottom, that nothing could hurt more than reading those words. But as I would soon learn, this was only the beginning. The truth has a way of clawing its way into the light no matter how deeply it's buried, and my family's truth was about to explode wide open. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay in bed with my phone still resting on the nightstand. The screenshot burned into my mind like a scar. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their words again. Finally rid of her. My brother's confident dismissal, my sister's smug agreement, my mother's cold approval. It was like my entire life had been rewritten in a single instant. All the years I had believed that maybe, deep down, I was loved. All the times I told myself I was part of them, even if I wasn't the favorite, it all crumbled with those messages. What remained was the chilling realization that maybe I had never belonged to them at all. The next morning, I went through the motions like a ghost. I got ready for work, brushed my hair, put on the pale blue cardigan I often wore to school, and forced a smile as I greeted my students. On the outside, nothing had changed. To my coworkers and the children, I was still Miss Donovan, the teacher who handed out stickers for good behavior and told stories about her wonderful family. On the inside, though, I felt hollowed out. Every word I spoke an echo through an empty chamber. During lunch, while my colleagues chatted about vacation plans and grocery sales, I sat quietly, replaying every memory I had of my family through this new lens. Had they always despised me this much? The sharp comments Ethan made about me being too sensitive, the way Lily would roll her eyes when I tried to share an accomplishment, my mother's silence when I needed comfort most. I had brushed those moments off as normal sibling rivalry, as busy parenting, as quirks. But now with the truth staring me in the face, they all seemed like pieces of a larger pattern I had refused to see. The truth was, my family had been pushing me to the margins for years. I was invited to gatherings as an afterthought, seated at the end of the table, handed tasks like cleaning up or watching the kids while everyone else laughed and toasted each other's successes. If I spoke up, I was too dramatic. If I stayed quiet, I was distant. Nothing I did ever seemed right. Yet I still tried, still showed up, still hoped one day they'd see me as worthy. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you were enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. It wasn't just about being overlooked. It was the subtle cruelty that chipped away at me, piece by piece.
I remembered last Christmas when I'd baked cookies for the entire family, staying up until midnight to make sure everyone's favorite flavor was included. When I brought them over, Ethan had smirked and said, "Trying to make yourself useful for once?" Everyone laughed. I laughed too because that was what was expected. But that night, driving home alone, the words had stung in a way I couldn't shake. Or the time Lily showcased her art at a local gallery and I had gone early to help set up. She barely acknowledged me in front of her friends, but later she whispered sharply, "Don't embarrass me tonight, okay?" As if my very presence was a liability. My parents had cooed over her paintings, telling everyone how talented she was, while I stood quietly in the back, clapping at the right moments, invisible. These were the moments that, at the time, I had shoved aside, convincing myself that it was my fault, that I just wasn't trying hard enough. But now, after reading those messages, I saw them for what they were, signs of a family that had decided long ago that I didn't belong. They had been preparing to be rid of me long before they wrote those words. The group chat was just the confirmation.
That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the screenshot open again, staring at it until the letters blurred. My apartment was small, quiet, filled with books and plants that had become my companions in the absence of meaningful family bonds. The silence pressed against me, heavier than ever before. I tried to call my best friend, Megan, but when her voicemail picked up, I couldn't bring myself to leave a message. What would I even say? "Hey, guess what? My family has been plotting to erase me like I'm some stain they can wash out." It sounded absurd, melodramatic even, though the evidence was right there. The more I thought about it, the more I realized why I hesitated. For years, I had protected my family's image. I had excused their coldness, defended them when people questioned their behavior, even laughed along when they mocked me. Admitting the truth would mean admitting that the family I had been proud to call mine was built on lies and cruelty. It would mean that everything I had believed in, the Sunday dinners, the Christmas mornings, the birthday calls, was hollow. And I wasn't sure I was ready to face that. So I stayed silent, for now. But silence didn't mean I wasn't paying attention. In fact, I started noticing things I had overlooked before. The way my mother's voice tightened whenever I asked about family plans. The way Ethan conveniently forgot to include me in group texts about gatherings. The way Lily avoided me at community events as if acknowledging me would tarnish her shine. These weren't coincidences. They were deliberate. My family had been trying to erase me quietly, and the group chat was just their unfiltered truth spilling out. Every night, I wrestled with the same question. Why? Why did they despise me so much? What had I done to earn their hatred? I was the one who stayed behind when Ethan went to college, the one who helped my mom when she had surgery, the one who cheered for Lily even when she pushed me away. I had given, and in return, I was seen as nothing more than a burden. The realization sat heavy in my chest, but so did another thought, one that surprised me. If I had proof of their words, if I had this screenshot, maybe I didn't have to stay silent forever. Maybe one day I could hold it up to the light and let the world see what my perfect family was really like. I wasn't ready yet, but the seed had been planted, and seeds, once planted, have a way of growing, even in the darkest soil. The days that followed felt like walking through fog, every step weighted with the knowledge of what I had uncovered. I went to work, smiled at my students, even waved to my neighbors, but beneath it all, I was unraveling. It was like carrying a live wire inside me. Any moment it could spark, burn, expose me. I told myself to stay calm, to keep going as if nothing had changed, but inside I was simmering with a mix of heartbreak and anger. The messages haunted me every time I looked at my phone. I couldn't unread them, couldn't pretend they weren't real. They lingered in the back of my mind, whispering, confirming all the insecurities I had worked so hard to silence. Then came the moment when it all became impossible to hide. My family was planning a dinner, something they had conveniently forgotten to mention to me. I found out not because they told me, but because Megan, who followed my sister on social media, sent me a message. "Are you going to Lily's dinner? She just posted a picture of the invites. My stomach dropped. I scrolled through Lily's page, and there it was, a cheerful post about family gathering this Friday, can't wait to celebrate us. Dozens of likes and comments, friends congratulating her, neighbors talking about how wonderful the Donovans were, and me, once again, erased. At first, I told myself maybe it was just a mistake. Maybe the invitation was coming, maybe it had gotten lost in the mail, maybe they'd just forgotten in the chaos of planning. But then I looked at the picture again and saw all the envelopes neatly stacked, each with names written in Lily's careful handwriting. Ethan, Mom, Dad, Uncle Greg, Aunt Marlene, even distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. But not mine. Not Claire. Not the daughter who lived 20 minutes away, who never missed a family event unless she was sick, who rearranged her life to be present. It was undeniable. I hadn't been invited. The screenshot of the group chat came rushing back to me, finally rid of her. This wasn't a one-off comment. This was the plan in action. Slowly but surely, they were excising me from their lives, cutting me out of the picture until no one remembered I had ever been part of it.
That Friday, I sat alone in my apartment while my family clinked glasses and posed for photos in Lily's living room. Megan called me, furious on my behalf, urging me to confront them. Claire, you can't keep letting them do this to you. They're cruel. They're toxic. You need to stand up for yourself. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But every time I thought about confronting them, I heard Ethan's voice in my head, calm and dismissive. She's too sensitive. I imagined my mother's practiced sigh, the one she used when she wanted to make me feel small. You're imagining things again. I knew them well enough to know how it would go. They'd twist it, laugh it off, make me feel like the crazy one. But something inside me shifted that night. As I scrolled through the photos Lily posted, her arm around Ethan, my parents smiling proudly in the center, captions filled with words like family forever and grateful for my people, the hollowness gave way to fire. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining it. I had the screenshot. I had the evidence. I had the proof of what they were saying when they thought I wasn't looking. And now I had this, the public erasure, the proof that they wanted to celebrate without me. The breaking point came not with a scream, not with a confrontation, but with a quiet realization. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. For years, I had swallowed my pain, laughed off their cruelty, done everything I could to earn scraps of affection. But no matter how much I gave, it would never be enough. They didn't want me. And if I stayed silent, they would keep erasing me until there was nothing left of who I was in their story. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and pen and began writing down everything I had noticed over the years. The moments of exclusion, the cruel remarks, the silent treatments, the missed invitations. I wrote about the group chat, the screenshot, the dinner I had been excluded from. I wrote because I needed to see it all laid out, because part of me still doubted, still feared I was overreacting. But as the pages filled, the pattern became undeniable. This wasn't in my head. This was deliberate. That same day, something unexpected happened that pushed me further than I thought I could go. One of my colleagues, Mrs. Green, who taught third grade down the hall from me, pulled me aside after school. She had seen Lily's social media post. Everyone in town followed my family, it seemed. And she asked gently, "Weren't you there last night? I thought it was a family thing." Her tone wasn't accusatory, just curious. But her words hit me like a stone. Because for the first time, someone outside my family noticed. Someone else saw the cracks in the image the Donovans so carefully maintained. I stumbled through an excuse, mumbling something about being too busy, but the look in her eyes told me she didn't believe me. And in that moment, I realized if one person could notice, others could too. The truth didn't have to stay hidden forever. That evening, I pulled out my phone and looked again at the screenshot.
My finger hovered over the share button, my heart pounding. I wasn't ready to post it publicly, not yet. But I sent it to Megan. My hands shook as I hit send, but the relief that washed over me when she texted back, "Claire, this is real. You're not imagining it. You have proof," was overwhelming. For the first time in days, I felt like maybe I wasn't crazy. Maybe I wasn't alone. It wasn't the big confrontation yet, but it was a step. And once that step was taken, there was no going back. I had let someone else into the secret, and now the truth had begun to breathe. I didn't know it then, but the decision to take that single step, to share the screenshot, was the point of no return. The old way, the silent suffering, was over. A new path had opened, one that would expose everything my family had worked so hard to hide. When I sent Megan the screenshot, I thought it would end there. A desperate plea for validation, proof that I wasn't imagining the cruelty I had endured for so long. But the moment she saw it, something shifted. Megan was not the type to stay quiet in the face of injustice. We had been friends since college, and if there was one thing I knew about her, it was that she believed in calling things out, no matter how uncomfortable others made it. Where I had been trained my whole life to shrink, to swallow, to smooth things over, Megan had always been the fire that refused to dim. And now, with the screenshot in her hands, that fire turned toward my family. "Claire," she said firmly when we met at a coffee shop 2 days later, "this isn't just gossip or mean comments. This is abuse. They are actively trying to erase you, and they're arrogant enough to celebrate it in writing. You can't keep this between us. Someone else needs to know."
Her words made me flinch. Abuse. I had never used that word before, not even in my own thoughts. It felt too big, too heavy, too real. But as she looked at me with fierce determination, I realized that maybe that was exactly what it was. Abuse doesn't always leave bruises. Sometimes it leaves invisible scars. Words carved into your sense of self, until you no longer know who you are without them. I stirred my coffee slowly, staring at the foam as if it held the answers. Even if I showed this to someone else, what difference would it make? They'd just say I misunderstood, or that it was a joke. Megan leaned across the table, her voice low but urgent. "Not everyone will excuse them the way you do. People are watching, Claire. Your colleague already noticed you weren't at that dinner. What happens when more people start asking questions? When they see this?" Her point lodged itself in my chest, both terrifying and liberating. She was right. My family's polished image was already cracking. For years, they had presented themselves as the ideal small-town family, hard-working father, nurturing mother, successful children. But behind the scenes, their cruelty toward me had been growing, spilling over until it became visible even to outsiders. The dinner I hadn't been invited to wasn't just a private slight. It was a public omission, and people had noticed. That realization became clearer a week later when I was grading papers after class and Mrs. Green stopped by my desk again. She lingered awkwardly, as if debating whether to speak, and then finally said, "Claire, I hope you don't mind me asking, but is everything okay with your family? I don't understand why you weren't at Lily's dinner. Everyone was talking about it." Her kindness made my throat tighten. I wanted to lie, to brush it off with some vague excuse, but the words tangled on my tongue. All I could manage was, "Things are complicated." Mrs. Green gave me a long, searching look before nodding. "Well, if you ever need to talk, you know where to find me." Then she left, but her concern lingered with me. The fact that she had noticed, that she cared enough to ask, felt like the smallest lifeline in a sea I had been drowning in for years. For the first time, I began to see that my family's actions weren't hidden anymore. The cracks were widening, and the truth was seeping out whether they wanted it or not. And that terrified them. Though I didn't know it yet, they were already scrambling behind the scenes, trying to make sure their narrative stayed intact. The first sign came when Ethan called me unexpectedly. His voice was smooth, controlled, the way it was always when he was trying to manage a situation. "Hey, Claire," he began casually. "Just wanted to check in. Haven't heard from you in a bit. How are things?" I froze, my mind racing. He hadn't called me in months, not without some ulterior motive. And now, suddenly, after I had discovered the group chat and skipped Lily's dinner, he was reaching out? It wasn't concern, it was damage control. "I'm fine," I said shortly, keeping my tone neutral. There was a pause before he continued. "Listen, about the dinner, Lily didn't mean to leave you out. It was just a small thing, you know? Didn't want to overwhelm you." Overwhelm me? My jaw clenched. He was rewriting the story already, turning my exclusion into an act of kindness. It was infuriating, but it also confirmed what I suspected. They knew I had noticed. "Right," I said flatly, unwilling to play along. Another pause, then a hint of steel in his voice. "Family sticks together, Claire. You should remember that." The call ended soon after, but his words echoed in my mind. It wasn't just a reminder. It was a warning. He wanted me silent. He wanted me compliant. And for years, that had worked. But now, I wasn't sure it would anymore. That evening, I told Megan about the call, and she shook her head. "They're scared. That's why he called. He knows you could expose them. And the thing is, Claire, you already have the power. You just haven't used it yet." Her words lit a spark inside me. For so long, I had seen myself as powerless, the forgotten daughter, the expendable sister. But now, with the screenshot in my possession and others beginning to notice the truth, the balance was shifting. They were the ones on the defensive, scrambling to maintain their facade. And me? I had the one thing they couldn't control: evidence. I didn't act on it immediately. Fear still held me back. The years of conditioning that told me I was the problem, that I was too much, too sensitive, too dramatic. But deep down, I knew the tide was turning. Outside eyes had seen the truth, and once that happened, there was no going back. What I didn't realize then was that this was only the beginning. The group chat, the dinner, Ethan's call, they were small fractures compared to the earthquake that was coming. Because soon, undeniable proof would surface, and no amount of manipulation would be able to contain it. My family had spent years burying their cruelty in shadows, but the light was finding its way in. And once it did, everything they had built was destined to collapse.
After Ethan's phone call, the walls I had lived inside for years began to feel unstable. Like one wrong move could send the whole structure crashing down. I couldn't unhear his voice, the way he framed exclusion as protection, the calculated manipulation threaded into every syllable. It was a reminder of how my family operated. Never admit, never apologize, always twist the truth until it suited them. For the first time, though, I wasn't buying it. Instead, I felt an unfamiliar urge growing inside me, an urge to push back. The screenshot had become my anchor, proof that I wasn't imagining the cruelty. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized one screenshot wasn't enough. My family was skilled at deception. If I ever revealed the truth, they'd claim it was out of context, a misunderstanding, maybe even fabricated. I could already hear Ethan in my head. "You really think anyone's gonna believe her? She's always been emotional." I needed more than a single image. I needed a pattern, a story too undeniable to dismiss. So I began quietly gathering evidence. Every message, every slight, every omission, I documented it all. I took screenshots of conversations where plans were discussed without me, noting the timestamps, the words they chose. I went back through years of emails and texts, compiling the moments that had always made me uneasy. The time my mother had told me not to bother coming to Thanksgiving because there won't be room at the table. The time Ethan had sent a family update to everyone but me. The time Lily had messaged a group about our father's birthday, only for me to discover days later that the party had already come and gone. It was grueling work, reliving each rejection, but with every piece of evidence I gathered, I felt a strange sense of empowerment. For years, their words had floated in the air like smoke, choking me, but leaving no trace. Now I was capturing them, bottling them, building a case against the illusion they had spent so long maintaining. But the more I gathered, the more paranoid I became. What if they found out what I was doing? What if they realized I was no longer the passive pliant Claire they could control? I started noticing subtle shifts in their behavior that suggested they already suspected something. My mother, who rarely reached out, began calling me with forced cheerfulness. Her voice too bright, too rehearsed. "Just wanted to check in on my girl," she'd say, as if the years of indifference could be erased with a sugary tone. Lily, on the other hand, grew more hostile online. Though she didn't mention me directly, her posts were increasingly pointed. Cryptic quotes about toxic people and the importance of cutting out negativity. Her followers showered her with support, oblivious to the fact that the negativity she spoke of was me. Each post felt like a dagger, a public preemptive strike against whatever story I might one day tell. Ethan was the most cunning of all. He began slipping small comments into conversations with mutual acquaintances, little seeds designed to discredit me before I could even speak. One afternoon, Megan ran into him at the grocery store. Later, she told me how he had smiled pleasantly and said, "I worry about Claire sometimes, you know. She's so sensitive. I hope she's not misinterpreting things again." Megan, bless her, saw through it immediately, but I knew others might not. Ethan was charming, successful, respected. If he painted me as unstable, plenty of people would believe him. The opposition was rising, subtle but undeniable. They sensed a shift, and they were preparing for it. And I, caught between fear and determination, wrestled with the question of whether I was strong enough to go through with this. Exposing them would mean burning bridges that could never be rebuilt. It would mean standing alone against the very people who had defined me for my entire life. But staying silent would mean letting them erase me completely. One night, overwhelmed by the weight of it all, I called Megan. My voice cracked as I confessed, "What if I can't do this? What if I show people the truth and no one believes me? What if I just make things worse?" She didn't hesitate. "Claire, listen to me. You've been carrying this alone for too long. You're not crazy, you're not overreacting, and you're not alone. If they want to play games with the truth, fine, but you have something they don't. Evidence. The truth is on your side." Her words steadied me, but they didn't erase the fear. That fear followed me into my dreams, where I imagined standing in front of a crowd, my family glaring at me as I tried to speak, my voice drowned out by their denials. I woke from those dreams with my heart pounding, drenched in sweat. The thought of losing them completely, of severing ties I had clung to for so long, was terrifying, even if those ties had been strangling me. Still, I kept gathering. I saved every interaction, every slight. I wrote down conversations from memory, cataloged the ways they twisted narratives to their advantage. Piece by piece, I built a mosaic of truth, a picture so clear that one day it could not be denied. But the closer I got to the heart of it, the more dangerous it felt. There was a sense of something looming, as if my family was preparing their final defense. And in a way, they were. Because while I was collecting evidence in the shadows, they were working in the light, crafting a story of their own, one where I was the problem, I was the outcast, I was the one who had abandoned them. The tension was coiling tighter, the line between truth and lies growing thinner. I could feel it building towards something inevitable, something explosive. And though I was still afraid, a quiet voice inside me kept whispering, "Keep going, don't stop. They've hidden the truth for too long. It's time someone saw them for who they really are." Little did I know the undeniable proof I was searching for was closer than I realized. And once it came to light, there would be no going back. Not for me, and not for them. The day I stumbled upon the proof that changed everything began like any other. Quiet, ordinary, deceptively calm. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind where the air felt heavy with stillness, and I had convinced myself to take a break from combing through old messages.
My mind was raw from reliving so many rejections, and I wanted nothing more than to shut my laptop, pour a glass of wine, and forget for a few hours. But curiosity, or maybe compulsion, pulled me back in. There was a gnawing in my gut, a sense that I hadn't yet uncovered the full extent of their betrayal. And so, against my better judgment, I opened my phone again. It started with a notification I almost missed. A new message had been sent in a group chat that I hadn't realized I still had muted. It was labeled Family Updates, the one they had long stopped including me in. For some reason, this time, the chat appeared in my feed. Maybe someone had added me back in by mistake, or maybe technology had glitched in my favor. My thumb hovered over the screen, my heart pounding. Against every ounce of self-preservation, I tapped it open. What I saw made the air in my lungs freeze. The thread was buzzing with conversation, a flurry of messages between my mother, Ethan, and Lily. They weren't even talking in riddles this time. They were blunt, unfiltered, cruel in ways I had never allowed myself to believe possible. Ethan had sent a message saying, "She's been too quiet lately. Do you think she suspects?" Lily replied almost instantly, "She's not smart enough to put the pieces together. Besides, she always second-guesses herself." And then, as if twisting the knife, my mother chimed in, "Good! The less she knows, the easier it is to finally be rid of her." Finally be rid of her. There it was again, the same phrase that had haunted me in that first screenshot. But this time, it wasn't a one-off comment I could question or explain away. It was a coordinated effort, laid bare in black and white, proving that my family wasn't just neglecting me or forgetting me, they were actively plotting to erase me. I stared at the screen, my pulse roaring in my ears. My hands trembled as I scrolled further. Ethan had added, "We just have to stay united. If she ever tries to stir up trouble, we frame it as her being dramatic, unstable. That way no one believes her." My mother had liked the message with a little thumbs-up emoji. Lily piled on, "It's been working for years. Everyone already sees her as the odd one out. She'll hang herself with her own words." I felt my stomach lurch, bile writhing in my throat. The cruelty wasn't just in their words, but in the casualness of it, the way they spoke about me as if I were nothing more than a problem to be solved, a nuisance to be discarded. There was no hesitation, no guilt, no love, just strategy, just calculation. The undeniable truth washed over me in waves that left me breathless. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't imagining slights or reading too much into their actions. They had been orchestrating this for years, gaslighting me, isolating me, rewriting stories so that I looked like the unstable one. And all along, I had twisted myself into knots, trying to be good enough, kind enough, useful enough to earn their love back. But their love had never been mine to earn. They had made their choice long ago. For a long moment, I sat frozen, staring at the words that had finally stripped away the last of my illusions. Then instinct kicked in. I began taking screenshots, my fingers flying as I captured every message, every timestamp, every piece of their poisonous plan. I saved them in multiple places, my phone, my laptop, even emailed copies to myself. If they ever tried to delete the evidence, I would still have it. This time, they wouldn't be able to spin it. This time, the truth was mine to wield.
But along with the empowerment came a deep, suffocating grief. As much as I had suspected, as much as I had prepared myself, a part of me still clung to the hope that maybe I was wrong, maybe there was some explanation. That hope shattered into 1,000 pieces as I read those words, as I heard my mother's voice in my head saying she was glad I didn't know the truth. The woman who had once tucked me into bed and kissed my forehead goodnight had signed off on my erasure. My brother and sister, the people I had defended against the world, had turned their knives inward, aiming straight for me. I don't remember crying, not exactly. The tears came too fast and too hard for me to register them. One moment, I was staring blankly at my phone. The next, I was doubled over on my couch, clutching my chest as sobs racked through me. It felt like mourning a death. The death of the family I thought I had. The death of the Claire who still believed she might belong. When the storm of tears finally subsided, something inside me shifted. The grief didn't vanish, but it hardened into something sharper, steadier. Resolve. They wanted me gone, silenced, erased. But now I had proof. They couldn't bury me in whispers and lies anymore. The truth was in my hands, and no matter how much it hurt, I couldn't let it go. That night, as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, I realized this was the turning point. Everything had changed. I was no longer the quiet, desperate daughter begging for scraps of affection. I was the keeper of their secrets, the one who could pull back the curtain and show the world who they really were. And though fear still curled in my stomach, it no longer controlled me. The game had shifted. The balance of power was no longer entirely in their favor. For the first time in years, maybe ever, I wasn't powerless. I had the truth, and the truth, once seen, could never be unseen. The question now wasn't whether I had proof, it was what I would do with it. For days, I barely ate or slept. My apartment became a fortress of evidence. Notebooks stacked with timelines, my laptop cluttered with screenshots, email threads backed up and stored in every folder imaginable. The weight of knowledge pressed down on me relentlessly. I knew I couldn't go back to the life I had been living pretending nothing was wrong, smiling politely while my family celebrated my absence. I was no longer the girl who shrank to make them comfortable. I had the truth, and the truth demanded action. But action was terrifying. Even with proof, speaking up meant exposing not just my family's cruelty, but the entire illusion they had carefully cultivated for years. My father's reputation in the hardware store community, my mother's image as the gentle, nurturing nurse, Ethan's polished lawyer persona, Lily's delicate, charming facade, all of it could crumble in an instant. And I had to be ready for the fallout. The thought of public judgment, whispers behind my back, and the inevitable family confrontation made my stomach churn. The first time I voiced my intentions aloud was to Megan. We were sitting on my tiny balcony, the city lights of Portland glowing faintly through the fog. "I can't stay silent anymore," I said, my voice trembling but determined. "They've been lying, erasing me, twisting my reality for years. I have to tell someone. I have to show them who they really are." Megan's eyes widened, a mixture of pride and concern. "Claire, are you ready for this? Once you do, there's no going back. Your parents, your siblings, they'll fight you, and it won't be subtle. They'll try to gaslight you, make you look unstable, make you doubt yourself." I nodded, swallowing hard. I had thought about this over and over, imagined their responses, their calculated manipulations, and yet nothing could have prepared me for the surge of resolve that now coursed through me. This wasn't about vengeance, not really. It was about reclaiming my reality, taking back my identity from the people who had systematically tried to erase me. I had been cautious, collecting proof, waiting, hoping for validation. Now the waiting was over. The choice to speak wasn't easy. Every part of me screamed to stay silent, to avoid the confrontation, to keep the fragile peace of avoidance. But I knew that staying silent had never saved me before. It had only allowed their cruelty to continue, to metastasize behind polite smiles and casual remarks. The decision became clear the night I saw another message in the group chat, one that sealed my resolve. Ethan had typed, "She's onto us. Be careful. We can't let her make a scene." The words hit me like a slap across the face. They were aware. They knew I had proof, and they were preparing. My family's calculated measures to preserve their image suddenly felt threatening, almost predatory. But it also confirmed one thing I had suspected for years. I had the upper hand, at least for now.
They couldn't erase what I had captured. They couldn't rewrite the conversations I had meticulously saved.
For the first time, I envisioned what confronting them might look like. I imagined sitting them down, laying the evidence before them, and letting the words speak for themselves. I imagined the look on their faces, the forced smiles replaced by panic, the moments of realization that their careful construction of lies could crumble in an instant. My heart raced at the thought, fear mingling with a fierce sense of vindication. It wasn't enough to simply expose them. I needed to be methodical, precise, and unemotional. I began drafting a plan, outlining the steps I would take. First, I would confront them privately, one-on-one, to observe their reactions and gauge the truth of their intentions. Then, if necessary, I would expand to those who had been quietly observing, friends, colleagues, even neighbors who had begun to notice the subtle slights and omissions over the years. My proof was irrefutable, but presentation mattered. I couldn't allow them to twist the narrative again. The night before the confrontation, I barely slept. I paced my apartment, rehearsing the words I would say, anticipating the excuses, the manipulations, the pleading and gaslighting that would inevitably come. I imagined my mother's soft voice, attempting to charm and soothe, Ethan's measured logic, Lily's biting sarcasm. I felt fear coil in my chest, tight and suffocating. But beneath the fear, a steady flame of resolve burned brighter. This wasn't about revenge. This was about truth. And truth, once seen, could not be unseen. The morning of my decision, I took one last look at my collection of evidence. Every message, every screenshot, every documented slight stared back at me like a testament to years of being dismissed, erased, and misunderstood. I felt a surge of clarity. I would speak, and I would not back down. The old Claire, the one who stayed silent, who accepted her family's cruelty as normal, was gone. She had been erased from their picture, yes, but the new Claire, the Claire who had proof and courage and unshakable resolve, was rising from the ashes. By mid-afternoon, I had sent a message to my mother, asking her to meet me at a neutral location, a quiet cafe downtown. I didn't tell her why, only that we needed to talk. I expected resistance, perhaps even outright refusal, but my resolve had hardened. There was no turning back. They could ignore me, gaslight me, twist the narrative, but the choice to speak had already been made. The floodgates were opening, whether they liked it or not. As I walked to the cafe, clutching my notebook and phone, I felt a strange mixture of fear, grief, and exhilaration. This was the point of no return. The choice to speak, once made, could never be undone. But for the first time in my life, I felt a sliver of control. I wasn't the powerless one anymore. I had the truth, and I was ready to make them face it. The cafe was quiet when I arrived, a soft hum of conversations and clinking cups filling the space, but every sound seemed distant, as if I were underwater. My hands were clammy, and the notebook I carried felt heavier than it actually was, loaded with years of proof, every slight, every insult, every exclusion captured in meticulous detail. I had rehearsed this moment over and over, picturing how I would speak, how I would remain calm, how I would finally make them see the truth without breaking down. But now, as I spotted my mother entering, followed closely by Ethan and Lily, my heart pounded in a rhythm that mocked my resolve. They sat down across from me with smiles that were far too casual, faces carefully polished, eyes darting just enough to gauge my expression. My mother's voice was saccharine, almost cheerful. "Claire, you wanted to talk?" She gave me a look that tried to disarm, to make me doubt myself before I even opened my mouth. Ethan's expression was measured, unreadable, while Lily's thin-lipped smile barely concealed impatience. I took a deep breath, placing the notebook in front of me, and opened it to the first page. I've collected every message, every conversation, every time I've been excluded or belittled. I've documented years of being erased from family events, overlooked, and mistreated. And I have proof. Their smiles faltered slightly, tiny cracks appearing in the veneer they had so carefully maintained.
Ethan leaned back, his hands folded neatly on the table, trying to look relaxed, but failing to hide the slight tension in his jaw. My mother's fingers tightened around her coffee cup, her knuckles whitening, and Lily shifted in her seat, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, in a gesture that suddenly felt more defensive than casual. I started presenting the evidence, showing the screenshots of the group chats, the messages where they explicitly planned my exclusion, their discussions about how to make me seem unstable and dramatic. My voice grew steadier with each revelation. These aren't misunderstandings. These aren't mistakes. These are deliberate actions planned and executed to make me feel worthless, to erase me from the family you claim I belong to. I'm done being silent.
The reactions were immediate, and the tension in the room thickened, a storm finally breaking. My mother's voice rose, pitched higher than normal. "Claire, you don't understand. You're twisting everything. We've always loved you. This is ridiculous." Her eyes darted nervously to Ethan and Lily, almost pleading for support, for some validation of the narrative she had spent decades maintaining. Ethan's calm, controlled tone came next, sharper now. "Claire, you're being dramatic, as usual. These messages, you're reading them the wrong way. We've been looking out for you. You always take things too personally." His words were meant to undermine me, to gaslight, to make me doubt the clarity I had fought so hard to achieve. But I had prepared for this. I had the proof, I had the context, and I had the undeniable pattern laid bare in front of me. Lily's contribution was cutting, venomous. "You've always been the problem, Claire. We've tried to include you, we've tried to tolerate your oversensitivity, but you make everything about yourself. You're looking for drama where none exists." Her eyes flicked to mine, daring me to argue, to falter. I felt a surge of anger, but I kept it under control, steadying my voice. "You can call it drama, you can twist it any way you want, but the evidence doesn't lie. You've planned this. You've deliberately tried to erase me, and now I'm showing the world what you've been hiding." My mother's composure broke first. She slammed her cup down on the table, the clatter startling in the quiet cafe. "How dare you! After everything we've done for you?" Her voice cracked with the weight of her own guilt and frustration. Ethan leaned in, voice tight, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Claire, stop this. You're embarrassing yourself and the family. People will think you're unstable." I pressed on, unwavering. Embarrassment isn't the point anymore. Accountability is. I've been silent for years, and that silence has allowed you to manipulate, to belittle, to erase. I will no longer be complicit in hiding the truth. The cafe seemed to shrink around us as the confrontation escalated. Other patrons glanced our way, sensing the tension, and my mother's face flushed with anger and shame. Lily's hands clenched into fists, while Ethan's jaw was tight, his eyes cold and calculating. The family I had once loved, the people I had defended against everyone else, had turned fully into my adversaries. And now the mask was gone. Their true nature was exposed in the raw heat of confrontation. In that moment, I realized that this wasn't just about me. It was about the pattern they had created, the lies they had told, the control they wielded over narrative and perception. By confronting them, I wasn't only standing up for myself, I was dismantling the illusion they had built for years, and it was terrifying and liberating all at once. I closed the notebook, letting the weight of the evidence settle on the table between us. Silence fell for a long, heavy minute, the kind that presses into your bones. Then my mother whispered, almost inaudibly, We didn't mean it like that." Ethan's eyes flicked to the floor, and Lily looked away, defiance replaced by unease. Their calculated defenses were faltering. The confrontation had shifted the balance, and for the first time, they were forced to face the consequences of their actions. I felt a strange mixture of relief and grief. Relief because I'd finally spoken, finally laid everything bare. Grief because the family I had believed in, the one I had longed to be part of, was irrevocably broken. But beneath it all was a burgeoning sense of strength. I had stood my ground.
I had faced the antagonists of my life and shown them that I would no longer be erased. And in doing so, I realized something crucial. The truth, once confronted, cannot be denied. The hours after the cafe confrontation were a haze of dread and disbelief. I had expected tension, even anger, but nothing could have prepared me for the storm that followed. As soon as I left, my phone began to vibrate relentlessly. Messages flooded in, not from friends offering support, but from other family members I hadn't even considered. Cousins, distant aunts, uncles, demanding explanations, questioning my integrity, calling me dramatic, unstable, and ungrateful. I tried to respond, to clarify, to explain, but the words stuck in my throat. Every message felt like a new blow, each one reinforcing the isolation I had feared. By the end of the evening, I had turned off notifications entirely. My phone sat on the counter, buzzing silently in a way that felt ominous, like a heartbeat I could no longer trust. Even Megan's calls were hesitant, cautious. She knew that the backlash was coming and that it could consume me if I let it. My apartment, once a place of solitude, felt claustrophobic. The walls seemed to press in, shadows lengthening across the floor, as if the weight of my family's anger had followed me home. The next morning, reality hit even harder. At work, I could feel eyes on me, whispers curling around the hallways. Rumors, the kind that travel faster than truth, had begun to circulate. My colleagues were kind, but I could sense the unease, the subtle glances that questioned my stability. The principal called me into her office under the pretense of discussing professional conduct, and though nothing overtly accusatory was said, the subtext was clear. My personal family issues were now bleeding into the perception of my professional life.
Even at home, the isolation was suffocating. I tried to reach out to my mother, to Ethan, to Lily, hoping for a moment of reconciliation and acknowledgement that the confrontation had been necessary, that I had the right to defend myself. But every attempt was met with silence or cold, calculated responses. They didn't apologize, they didn't explain. They doubled down on the narrative I was overreacting, trying to frame me as the one who had caused the upheaval. The family group chats, once bustling with orchestrated cruelty, now froze with tension, every message carefully curated to avoid further exposure while still maintaining dominance. I spent nights awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the confrontation in my mind. I questioned every word, every gesture, every choice I had made. Had I been too harsh? Too direct, too emotional? Or had I done what was necessary, what years of silence had demanded? The line between courage and recklessness blurred, leaving me exhausted and hollow. I ached for the family I thought I knew, the one I had longed to belong to, even as I realized that family, as I imagined it, no longer existed. The backlash wasn't only emotional. Subtle sabotage began to appear in my life. Invitations I would normally receive to local events or social gatherings stopped coming. Mutual acquaintances who had once been friendly were suddenly distant, hesitant to engage. Even Megan noticed the shift. One afternoon, she mentioned that neighbors had commented on the tension, how my family was spinning the narrative to cast me in a negative light. It was exhausting, watching the world turn against me in slow motion, a cruel reflection of the very erasure I had been trying to fight. At times, despair pressed so heavily against my chest that it felt impossible to breathe. I wandered aimlessly through my apartment, staring at the walls lined with evidence, the screenshots and notes I had meticulously gathered. They were proof, yes, but proof didn't ease the loneliness, didn't erase the sting of betrayal, didn't stop the gnawing fear that the world might side with them simply because they were polished, charming, and practiced liars. For the first time in weeks, I questioned whether I had made a mistake. Perhaps silence had been easier. Perhaps it had been safer. Perhaps my voice wasn't meant to be heard after all. But in the deepest hours of the night, when the apartment was dark and quiet and the weight of isolation threatened to crush me, a different feeling began to rise. It was subtle at first, barely a whisper, a fragile flicker of determination. I remembered the moments of clarity, the undeniable proof I had found,
the courage that had led me to confront them in the first place. I thought about Megan's unwavering support, the colleague who had noticed my absence, the small community of outsiders who could see the cracks my family tried to hide. And I realized something crucial. The backlash, the isolation, the threats, they were temporary. The truth, once spoken, could not be undone. It didn't make the pain go away. It didn't stop the loneliness from gnawing at my heart or the fear from lingering in the corners of my mind. But it gave me a lifeline, a thread of resolve that I could cling to. The family who had tried to erase me, the people who had plotted to silence me, could not touch that truth. It existed outside of their control, beyond their manipulation. And if I could hold on to it, nurture it, present it at the right moment, I could reclaim a sense of agency I hadn't felt in years. By the time dawn broke, I had made a decision. I would endure the backlash, I would face the isolation, I would weather the storm. Because the alternative, allowing them to continue their erasure unchallenged, was no longer an option. For the first time, I felt the weight of responsibility shift. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about standing for the truth, about showing that cruelty and manipulation, no matter how well hidden, could not go unchecked. I didn't know how long it would take, how many battles lay ahead, or how the world would ultimately respond, but I knew one thing. I would not back down. The confrontation had just been the beginning, and though the consequences were harsh, the truth was mine to wield, and that, I realized, was worth every sleepless night, every pang of grief, every moment of isolation. The decision to bring the evidence into the open was not made lightly. I spent days strategizing, considering every possible outcome, anticipating every defensive move my family might make. Megan helped me draft a careful presentation, a step-by-step revelation that laid out not just the evidence, but the timeline, the patterns, the deliberate cruelty. We practiced over and over in her living room, my voice shaking at first, but growing steadier each time, my resolve hardening like tempered steel. The goal was clear. No more ambiguity, no more manipulation. The truth had to be undeniable, and I had to deliver it without faltering.
The day of the confrontation, I arrived at the community center early. It wasn't a courtroom, but it felt like one, with rows of chairs and a small stage at the front. Friends, colleagues, and even a few neighbors who had quietly observed my family's dynamics over the years were present. Their presence was both comforting and nerve-wracking. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, assessing, judging, waiting. But I reminded myself why I was there, to speak the truth, to hold my family accountable, and to reclaim the narrative that had been stolen from me. When my family arrived, the tension in the room was palpable. My mother's smile was brittle, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her purse. Ethan's posture was rigid, his eyes cold and calculating, scanning the room for allies. Lily's expression was a mixture of defiance and fear, her perfectly composed demeanor faltering just enough to betray her anxiety. They had no idea what I was about to reveal, and I relished, in a measured way, the quiet anticipation that hung between us. I took a deep breath and began. For years, I believed the narrative my family wanted me to believe, that I was the problem, that I was oversensitive, that my feelings didn't matter. But I have discovered the truth, and today I am going to show you and everyone here the reality of what has been happening behind closed doors. Then I opened my notebook and began presenting the evidence. Screenshots of group chats, messages, emails, carefully annotated to provide context, lay before the room. I walked the audience through each instance, the invitations I had never received, the planning of events I was excluded from, the discussions about how to make me appear unstable. My voice grew stronger with each revelation, the anger and hurt I had felt over the years transforming into clarity and authority. The reactions were immediate and visceral. My mother gasped, her face paling as she recognized the words she had typed, the messages she had sent. Ethan leaned forward, his jaw tight as he scanned the evidence, the calculated calm he had maintained for so long cracking. Lily's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide in disbelief. The room was silent except for my voice, presenting fact after fact, pattern after pattern, the truth laid bare for all to see.
At a certain point, I paused and looked around the room, locking eyes with the audience. I said, "This isn't about drama. This isn't about exaggeration. This is about truth. For years, I was erased, belittled, and manipulated. For years, I questioned my own reality because of your actions. But the evidence speaks for itself." One by one, friends and neighbors began murmuring in acknowledgement, some nodding, others whispering softly to each other. A few colleagues from work who had been quietly observing the tension over the past weeks exchanged glances that conveyed both shock and validation. This wasn't just a personal confrontation anymore. It was a reckoning, a trial in the court of community and conscience. My family's defenses began to unravel. My mother attempted to interject, her voice wavering. "Claire, please, it's not like that. You're misinterpreting." I raised my hand, silencing her with a firmness that surprised even me. "No, there is no interpretation needed. The proof is here, and now you have to answer for it." Ethan's attempt to regain control came next. He leaned forward, trying to charm the audience, his voice smooth and practiced. "Claire, you're blowing this out of proportion. You're taking things too personally. Everyone has misunderstandings." And I held up a single screenshot, one that summarized years of manipulation and exclusion in a single, undeniable line. "This is not a misunderstanding. This is deliberate, and this is only a fraction of what I have documented." The room's attention shifted fully to him, and for the first time, the power in the room felt balanced. The charm and authority he had wielded for so long were ineffective against evidence. The audience reacted with murmurs of shock, their perception of the situation changing as they witnessed the truth unfold. I could see some of my family's allies shrinking in their seats, unsure how to respond. My mother's face crumpled, Lily's posture slumped, and Ethan's calculated composure finally gave way to visible frustration. The confrontation was no longer private. It was public, formal, and undeniable. I continued, walking through the final pieces of evidence, making it impossible for anyone present to deny the pattern, the intention, and the cruelty. By the time I finished, the room was silent, heavy with the weight of acknowledgement. I closed my notebook and looked directly at my family. "The truth has been hidden for too long. Now, you have to face it. And so does everyone who has been affected by it." In that moment, a strange mixture of fear, relief, and empowerment coursed through me. I had spoken the truth, laid everything bare, and refused to back down. The confrontation had reached its peak. The trial in the court of community and personal conscience was complete. And though I didn't yet know the final outcome, I knew one thing: the balance of power had shifted. For the first time, my voice had been heard, and the world could no longer ignore it.
In the days following the public confrontation, the air around me felt lighter, yet charged, as if the world itself had shifted slightly to acknowledge the truth I had finally spoken. The storm of whispers, messages, and rumors that had plagued me after the cafe encounter now carried a different weight. Instead of hearing skepticism or subtle undermining, I began to notice recognition and support. Friends and colleagues approached me quietly, their eyes filled with concern, yes, but also validation. "We had no idea," one of my coworkers said softly. "We always sensed something was off, but we didn't have proof. You did, and we see you." Those words, simple yet profound, hit harder than any confrontation I had experienced before. For the first time in years, I felt seen. The tangible consequences for my family were swift and unavoidable. The evidence I had presented spread quietly through the community, first as whispers, then as undeniable fact. Mutual acquaintances and extended family members who had once overlooked or ignored the tension now faced the reality of what had been hidden. Invitations to gatherings, social events, and community activities that my mother, Ethan, and Lily had once controlled became impossible to manipulate. My mother, Ethan, and Lily found themselves on the defensive at every turn, no longer able to hide behind the veneer of respectability. Their words, once carefully crafted to mask cruelty, now rang hollow, and people began to see them for what they truly were.
I received messages from distant relatives who had always admired my family's cohesion, expressing shock, support, and concern. "We never knew," one cousin wrote. "We trusted what we were told, but this changes everything. You did the right thing." Those messages were small but significant, reminders that the truth, once revealed, had ripple effects far beyond the immediate confrontation. My actions had created accountability, and that accountability was contagious. Even at home, the dynamic shifted. My mother's attempts to reach me were halting, filled with awkward apologies that fell short of genuine remorse. Ethan tried to reassert authority, but his polished demeanor could no longer intimidate me. Lily's sharp tongue was tempered by the knowledge that the world now saw her duplicity. For the first time, I felt the balance of power tipping in my favor, not through vengeance, but through clarity, transparency, and unassailable truth. I spent hours reflecting on what had occurred, revisiting the confrontation in my mind. It had been painful, exhausting, and emotionally raw, but it had also been transformative. The validation I felt was not just external. It came from within, from the knowledge that I had acted with courage, integrity, and precision. I had faced the antagonists of my life, presented the evidence, and refused to back down even when fear, grief, and doubt threatened to overwhelm me. And, in doing so, I had reclaimed my identity, my voice, and my agency. The public acknowledgement of the truth carried unexpected consequences for my family's relationships beyond me. Friends and neighbors who had once aligned with their narratives began to distance themselves, seeking to avoid the manipulations and deceit that had been exposed. My mother's social circle, previously protective and supportive, quietly shifted away, leaving her with a sense of isolation she had long imposed on me. Ethan's professional acquaintances, once charmed by his calculated persona, began to question his credibility. Lily, who had thrived on social validation, found herself increasingly scrutinized by peers who had once admired her charm. Justice, in its subtle yet potent form, was unfolding. For me, the vindication was not about revenge. It wasn't about humiliating my family or ensuring they suffered in retaliation. It was about the restoration of truth, the reclamation of my voice, and the empowerment that comes from standing firm in one's convictions. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years, a quiet confidence that I could navigate life on my own terms, without fear of manipulation or erasure. Megan remained my steadfast anchor throughout this process, her unwavering support a reminder that alliances based on integrity and care could withstand the turbulence of family betrayal. Together, we began to discuss ways to help others who might face similar situations, those trapped in patterns of manipulation, isolation, and erasure. I realized that my experience, painful as it had been, could serve a greater purpose as a roadmap for courage, a guide for reclaiming identity, and a testament to the power of truth. I also began to rebuild connections I had long neglected or avoided, reaching out to friends and community members who had observed the patterns but had hesitated to intervene. Those relationships strengthened, providing a network of understanding and support that contrasted sharply with the duplicity I had endured within my family. Slowly, life began to feel expansive again, filled with the possibility of genuine connections and authentic interactions. One evening, as I sat on my balcony, the city lights shimmering below, I reflected on the journey I had undertaken. Every sleepless night, every pang of grief, every moment to fear had led me to this point. I had faced the darkest parts of my family, exposed the lies and cruelty, and emerged with my identity intact. The balance of power had shifted, and I was free. Not just from their manipulation, but from the internalized self-doubt that had accompanied years of erasure.
Justice, I realized, was not always dramatic or immediate. Sometimes it was quiet, subtle, and cumulative, arriving in the form of recognition, accountability, and the validation of truth. I had achieved that, and in doing so, I had laid the foundation for a life built on integrity, resilience, and self-respect. The past could not be undone, and the wounds would take time to heal, but the transformation was real and irreversible. And as I closed my journal that night, Marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, I felt the unmistakable sense of vindication. The truth had prevailed, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and fully myself, ready to navigate a world that could no longer diminish me. Months had passed since the confrontation, and life had begun to take on a rhythm that felt unfamiliar yet freeing. The weight of my family's deceit, while never fully forgotten, no longer pressed against my chest like a constant storm. The evidence, once a shield and weapon, had transformed into a symbol of my resilience, a tangible representation of the courage it had taken to speak the truth. I had rebuilt my daily life with careful intention, surrounding myself with people who valued honesty, compassion, and mutual respect, creating a new ecosystem where my voice mattered. The apartment that had once felt like a cage now felt like a sanctuary, filled with sunlight, plants, and the quiet hum of a life reclaimed. My mornings began with a sense of purpose rather than dread. I would brew coffee and sit on the balcony overlooking the city as it slowly woke. These moments of solitude became rituals of reflection, allowing me to ground myself and remember the journey that had brought me here. I often reviewed the steps I had taken, the documentation, the confrontation, the public revelation, and marveled at the strength I had summoned when I needed it most. The Claire who had once doubted every thought and word, who had questioned her worth with every slight, had evolved into someone who trusted herself, who knew her value regardless of others' attempts to diminish it. One of the most profound changes was in my professional life. The colleagues who had once been merely acquaintances became allies, drawn to my authenticity and determination. I was invited to lead projects, contribute ideas, and mentor others, roles that I had previously avoided out of fear of overexposure or failure. Each interaction reinforced the understanding that credibility, once earned through integrity and perseverance, could not be undermined by past manipulations or familial sabotage. My voice, once muted and questioned, now carried weight and influence, and the confidence I felt in this arena spilled into every other facet of my life. But perhaps the most significant transformation occurred within my personal relationships. Friends who had stood by me, unwavering in their support, became pillars of my daily existence. Megan remained a constant presence, her unwavering encouragement reminding me of the power of loyalty, trust, and empathy. I also reached out to estranged friends and acquaintances who had been quietly aware of my family's behavior but had been unsure how to act. Together, we forged connections that celebrated authenticity and mutual respect, relationships built on truth rather than convenience. It was a revelation to realize that family could extend beyond bloodlines, encompassing anyone willing to see you as you truly are and to honor your worth. In time, I also began to engage with others who had experienced similar betrayals and manipulations within their own families. I shared my story, initially in small, cautious circles, and then more broadly through community groups and social media platforms. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from people who felt seen, validated, and inspired by my journey. Many described experiences of erasure, gaslighting, and isolation that mirrored my own, and hearing their stories deepened my understanding of the universality of such struggles. I realized that my journey, while intensely personal, carried the potential to empower others, to demonstrate that even in the face of deliberate attempts to silence and diminish, truth and courage could prevail. Despite the sense of purpose and empowerment, moments of reflection still carried tinges of sorrow. I mourned the family I had thought I knew, the imagined bonds that had been severed by deceit. But grief no longer defined me. It was a companion, a reminder of what had been endured and overcome, rather than a weight that threatened to crush me. I found ways to honor that grief, writing in my journal, meditating on lessons learned, and channeling the emotional energy into creative and productive pursuits. One day, as I walked through the park, a young woman approached me, hesitating before speaking. She had heard pieces of my story through mutual connections and wanted advice on how to confront her own family's manipulations. As I listened to her hesitations and fears, I recognized the old Claire, the girl who had questioned herself endlessly. But now I spoke from a place of experience,
empathy, and authority. I guided her through steps of documentation, strategic confrontation, and seeking supportive allies. Her eyes widened with recognition and relief as she realized that she was not alone, that courage could be nurtured, and that speaking the truth was not an act of recklessness, but of survival and self-respect.
That encounter crystallized the deeper purpose that had emerged from my journey. My transformation was not merely personal, it was communal. By standing firm, by refusing to be erased, I had created a blueprint for others who might face similar situations. My life, once overshadowed by betrayal and manipulation, had become a beacon of empowerment, a testament to resilience, and a source of hope. In the quiet moments of reflection, I often returned to the balcony, watching the city below, feeling a profound sense of completeness. The journey had been harrowing, filled with fear, grief, and uncertainty, yet it had led me to a place of strength, clarity, and self-determination. I was no longer the passive, questioning Claire who had endured in silence. I was the Claire who had faced deception head-on, reclaimed her voice, and transformed pain into purpose. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, I felt the final piece of transformation settle within me. The fear, the doubt, and the isolation had been replaced with empowerment, connection, and the knowledge that the truth, once uncovered and spoken, could not be undone. I had found not only my voice, but my purpose, and with it, the capacity to help others find theirs. The past was acknowledged, but no longer oppressive, and the future stretched before me bright with possibility, anchored by courage and illuminated by the unwavering light of truth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.